So I wanted to give you guys a little background on Clive Davis. He became president of Columbia Records back in 1967.
Fact, it's also been linked to the death of Whitney Houston. And even though this sounds crazy when you first hear it, everything begins to add up.
Driving music moguls from the 1960s.
You know that he discovered Earth, Wind, and Fire? Not the band, the elements.
As always, we're still doing this.
They call me the Grammy Godfather.
Exactly what happened inside the iconic Beverly Hilton remains a mystery. Paramedics raced to the fourth floor and found a lifeless Whitney Houston inside her hotel room bathtub. They tried in vain to resuscitate her with CPR.
You're out in Hollywood, a lot of people come up missing.
But who was Clive Davis before he became one of the most powerful men in entertainment? Tonight, we're going back to the beginning. There are singers, there are songwriters, there are producers, and then there are the people the public almost never sees. The people sitting in boardrooms, the people signing contracts, the people deciding whose voice the world will hear and whose voice may never leave the studio. For nearly 60 years, one man stood at the center of that power. His name was Clive Davis. To some, he was a visionary with an unmatched ability to recognize greatness. To others, he represented the enormous influence that record executives could have over the careers and sometimes the lives of artists. His fingerprints can be found on the careers of Whitney Houston, Alicia Keys, Aretha Franklin, Bruce Springsteen, Santana, Barry Manilow, and many more. His career spanned the rise of rock, R&B, soul, pop, and eventually hip-hop. But who was Clive Davis before he became one of the most powerful men in entertainment? Tonight, we're going back to the beginning.
This is where the story takes an even crazier turn. Jay-Z isn't working alone. Jay-Z was actually teaming up with Clive Davis behind the scenes to control the music industry.
Clive Davis put Sean Combs in position. The amount of abuse that Janis Joplin suffered when she wanted to leave Clive Davis management. The amount of abuse Whitney Houston suffered when she was ready to write her book. And then all of the abuses that she suffered, swinging it at Jay-Z's knees. I'm swinging it at Clive Davis's knees, and I'm swinging it at anybody else's knees who has had anything to do with this tyranny, with this evil.
My focus right now is Sean Combs because he's a trafficker. Most likely because he was victimized by his mentor, Clive Davis.
Rumor has it, allegedly, Diddy got on his knees for Clive Davis in 1994.
But he got a boss too, and his boss name is Clive Davis. Clive run him. Diddy don't run himself.
Clive Davis is where it all started. Jay-Z and Clive Davis are the two biggest music executives in hip-hop, and everything that happens on their order. Before Diddy, before Jay-Z, before the public power plays. Clive was already running things behind the scenes, shaping careers, deciding who rose, who fell, and who owed what to stay protected. He turned Diddy into the monster we see today.
And that's not my doing. That's not Cassie doing. That's his doing and his learned behavior from the people that mentored him.
Clive J. Davis was born on April 4, 1932, in the Crown Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, to a working-class Jewish family. Tragedy arrived early. He lost his mother as a teenager, and not long afterward, his father also died, leaving him an orphan by the age of 18. Rather than allowing those losses to define him, Davis poured himself into education. He earned a scholarship to New York University, and later another to Harvard Law School, graduating in 1956. At that point, few could have imagined that this young lawyer who did not perform music and was not known as a musician would eventually help shape the soundtrack of modern America. His first career was in law, not entertainment. That changed when the law firm he worked for represented Columbia Records. What began as legal work would soon become a life-changing opportunity. Davis joined Columbia Records as an attorney. He impressed executives with his intelligence and negotiating skills, including helping renegotiate contracts with major artists. Senior executives quickly noticed that he had exceptional business instincts. In 1967, he became president of Columbia Records. There was one surprising detail. Clive Davis had never been known as a musician. He didn't become famous because he sang or played guitar. His gift was something different. He believed he could recognize greatness before almost anyone else. That instinct would earn him a nickname that followed him for decades, the man with the golden ear. One event changed everything. It was a turning point. In 1967, Davis attended the Monterey Pop Festival in California. Until then, Columbia Records had not fully embraced the rapidly changing world of rock music. Monterey opened his eyes. It was a revelation. He watched performances that convinced him popular music was changing forever. Soon after, Columbia signed artists including Janis Joplin and Big Brother in the holding company, helping launch one of the defining voices of the era. Over the following years, Davis also played major roles in signing or supporting artists such as Santana, Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, Earth, Wind & Fire, Aerosmith, and Chicago. His reputation exploded. He was now a titan of the music industry. Inside the industry, people began to believe that if Clive Davis believed in you, your chances of becoming a star increased dramatically.
We lost an absolute titan of the music industry this week, so I wanted to share one part of his story that people forget. Because when people talk about Clive Davis, they usually talk about the wins, like how he signed and developed artists like Janis Joplin and Bruce Springsteen and Alicia Keys. Okay, so context. He became one of the most powerful people in music in the early 70s when he was president of Columbia Records. He had made it. He was one of the biggest executives in the world. He was the guy with the title, the reputation, the influence. Then he got fired. And not quietly either, not after some big decline. He was fired at the absolute peak of his power. There was this dispute over company expenses, there was this whole investigation, and suddenly he was pushed out the door. So for most people, that would be the end of the story of being at the top of the mountain like that. But remember, this is the guy who graduated from Harvard Law School on a full scholarship and was running Columbia Records at just 35. He was a serious operator. Also, he was orphaned at the age of 17 after losing both of his parents within a year. So resilience wasn't something that he learned later in life. It was something that he had to build, like as a teenager. So within a year of being fired from Columbia, Clive launched a new label. He called it Arista Records. He named it after the honor society that he belonged to as a student. Arista comes from the Greek word aristos, which means the best. And this is where it gets ridiculous. He somehow became even more successful. So Arista went on to become one of the biggest labels in the world. This was the time in his life when he spotted Whitney Houston performing in a nightclub in New York when she was just 19, and he signed her to his label. He also then worked with Patti Smith and the Kinks and Hall & Oates and so many artists. And then decades later, he'd left Arista at this point. He started another label and helped launch, get this, Alicia Keys. Imagine getting fired from the top job in your industry and then casually discovering Whitney Houston and Alicia Keys afterwards. Also, fun fact, in 2013, at the age of 80, Clive Davis came out as bisexual in his memoir. It's still one of the highest profile coming out stories the music industry has ever seen. He was 94 when he passed away this week, and whether you knew his name or not, chances are you spent your life listening to artists who he empowered because he believed in them so much. But mainly, I think his life is this beautiful example of how it's never too early to bounce back and it's never too late to become more fully yourself. I'm Poppy Reed, and if you like your music stories explained simply, hit follow for more.
By the early 1990s, the music industry was changing. Rock was no longer the only dominant force. R&B was exploding. Hip-hop was transforming from a cultural movement into one of the biggest businesses in America. Record executives had a choice: adapt, or they could simply become irrelevant. Clive Davis chose to adapt. While many executives underestimated rap music, Davis saw an opportunity. He recognized that hip-hop was becoming one of the most influential genres in the world, not just musically, but culturally and commercially. His labels increasingly invested in artists and partnerships that reflected this changing landscape. In New York City, a young executive named Sean Puff Daddy Combs had already begun making a name for himself. After leaving Uptown Records, Combs launched Bad Boy Records. To grow, Bad Boy needed major label distribution and financial backing. That backing came through a partnership with Arista Records, led by Clive Davis. The relationship was a business partnership. Bad Boy operated as its own label, while Arista helped distribute and market its releases, giving artists access to a much larger audience. Suddenly, the music world changed. Artists, including the notorious Big E, Faith Evans, 112, Mace, and others became household names. Hip-hop was no longer a niche genre. And just like that, hip-hop was mainstream. Many music historians credit these partnerships with helping reshape the business of rap music, allowing independent labels to reach a global audience while retaining their own identities.
There were rappers there from all over the country. They were invited to the home of Clive Davis, along with members of the CIA, FBI, which they didn't understand why the government was there, including many directors and CEOs of the private prisons throughout the United States was at that meeting in the mansion of Clive Davis. And they were telling these rappers, you need to create songs talking about killing police, calling black women bees and hoes. You need to get more nasty so we can fill our prisons that we're building. Okay.
You know what's crazy during that time? I can recall when that gangster music came into play.
That's it.
And how they, you know, I don't know if the guys rapping it really knew, but they created the atmosphere.
Yes.
But it went from, I remember guys wanting to wear like the African chains around their neck,
yes,
and dancing, and the haircuts, flat tops, Kid and Play,
Top,
Kwame, to the really thugged out and
yes,
just the gang stuff. And I can recall going into like liquor stores or different places, and all they had was blue and red rags.
Right.
It was just like that stuff was on program.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the industry, Clive Davis earned another reputation. If he believed in an artist, people listened. Executives, radio programmers, television networks, retailers, his endorsement carried enormous weight. Over the decades, he helped guide or revive the careers of artists, including Aretha Franklin, Barry Manilow, Carlos Santana, Jennifer Hudson, and Alicia Keys. To supporters, this was evidence of extraordinary talent for recognizing artists with lasting potential. To critics, it highlighted how much influence a handful of executives could have over what the public ultimately heard. By this point, Clive Davis had become more than a record executive. He had become a symbol of the music business itself. For decades, artists and advocates have criticized aspects of the recording industry, including long-term recording contracts, disputes over royalties, and ownership of master recordings, creative control, and the recoupment of recording costs before artists receive profits.
The record company, Clive Davis, we held them hostage like guns, the whole shebang. Yeah, it was like that.
Because, wait a minute. I want to make sure we understand.
Yes.
Guns?
Yes, guns.
With bullets?
With bullets.
Come on, give me the story,
I'm going to tell
baby.
you because TLC had generated on Crazy Sexy Cool $75 million, and they gave us $50,000 a piece. So I was like, what the hell? So, of course, Lisa was the ringleader.
Like, we need to go get our money. I need to know where my MFN money's at.
So, you know, she was locked up in the diversion center for burning down the house. And she was just like, okay, we gonna get LaFace and them girls I was locked up with. We gonna drive up there. We gonna take the guns. And then we had this limo driver.
Wait, she just got out of jail?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And we had the limo driver. And he was the getaway car. So we went up there and held everybody hostage. And Puffy was the one that snitched us out. Yo, B, yo, your girl's up here mad bugging, yo. And I was like, oh, Puff, why you gonna snitch us out, dog? But he called it, yeah, because we kicked him out of the meeting.
Well, wait a minute. Puffy, mind your damn business. Okay, go ahead, Sugar.
Oh, my God.
It taught me to never be afraid because I was so terrorized by him. Whether he meant to do it or not, I'll never know. But he sure taught me that if you try to terrorize me again, well, we can't say that on public radio. What I may do to someone who tries to hurt me again in this business, I'm not having it. I should be respected as I respect, and I will not have someone try to ruin my spirit and ruin my career. If Clive Davis, if his plan was to destroy my career, it didn't work.
Music executive died yesterday with a value of $850 million at the ripe age of 94, cozy and comfy in his bed. And every dollar of that $850 million was made off the backs of artists who did not make it to live past 50. Everything I'm about to say is verifiable information that you can find publicly on the internet. All right, let's jump in. The Aircrafts, 1967. One of the greatest soul singers to ever have lived, signs to a major record label through a subsidiary imprint, and then dies in a plane crash at the age of 26. 3 days after he recorded
sitting on the dock of the bay. A record that was not even finished by him because he did not live to finish it. The record company went ahead and filled the song with whistling as a placeholder and then released it anyway. This became the first post-death #1 single in music history. And when his label, after his death, went to claim his catalog, they found that a major record label that shall remain nameless had already claimed it. The plane went down, the catalog went up, and the company kept making money. 2001, a young artist whose uncle owned her masters dies in a plane crash. A witness states that she was allegedly given a sedative before she was loaded onto that plane unconscious. That plane was found to have been over its weight limit and piloted by someone with a fraudulent license. Her music's been locked in a vault for over 20 years, and her estate sees almost none of her revenue. The plane went down, the catalog went up, and the checks kept coming. 2026, an artist publicly announces his leaving his record label, saying on camera that he had made them tens of millions of dollars that the record company owes him. He gets his independent album going, starts off on his first world tour, and dies in a helicopter crash. Age of 32. Aircraft went down, catalog went up. The checks keep coming. Now let's talk about the ones that weren't aircraft, okay? 1996, an artist who was actively trying to unify the world through rap and who had cut the labels out of the beef between rap artists that they were profiting from is shot in a major American city in a car that he was not driving. 6 months later, the artist who this artist was beefing with is signed to the label the other artist was beefing with, that is actually co-founded by the same executive that died yesterday, is also shot in a major American city. Almost 30 years later, and both of their catalogs have generated over hundreds of millions of dollars since their deaths. 2019, an artist who owned everything, his store, his block, his label, was days away from meeting with LAPD about community investment, then shot outside his own business. A man was convicted, but the community never accepted the lone gunman story. He was 33. That the executive that died yesterday did not just own one record label. He was part of a an empire, if you will. He co-founded the label that most of these artists who have died in unsolved murders belong to. He co-founded the label that signed a group of 3 women who filed for bankruptcy despite making the record label $23 million. One of those women who died in a car accident in a car that she was not driving at the age of 30. Same man who discovered a young woman at 19 with a voice that could shake a house down, shaped her, molded her career, owned her voice and her body, and owned her entire catalog, decided to continue on with a party after they found her dead in a bathtub the night before. He was quoted saying she would have wanted the music to play on. She was 48. He lived to be 80, and during those years collected off of every single one of her hit songs, including after her death. Now here's what nobody wants you to understand, right? This is not illegal because the major labels have something that's called the Death and Disability Clause, which states that upon the death of the artist, the label retains full ownership of the catalog and can continue to profit from said catalog indefinitely. That's not a conspiracy theory. That is a clause. It's in stone. It's litigated. Look it up. This was designed to ensure that if the artist happens to die in a mysterious plane crash, helicopter crash, drug overdose, whatever the case may be, the machine keeps running. They keep making money after they're gone because the artist is replaceable, but the catalog is forever. Now, there are many other people that I could have brought up, I could have named, but I'm not going to name anybody else. All I simply did was read to you public information that is well documented about that music industry executive who died with a worth of $850 million that the industry wants you to believe was a legend worthy of being honored. And I just want to be sure y'all understand exactly who it is this legend was. Clive Davis was worth $850 million when he passed away at the age of 94, nice and comfortable in his home. And every dollar of that $850 million was built off the backs of artists who did not live to see 50. Now, in the first video, I told you about the airplanes. I told you about the unsolved murders. I told you about who bought the catalogs. I told you about who kept getting the checks after the artist passed. I told you about the clauses, and I told you about the post-death releases. But baby, today we're going to talk about the artist who screamed it, who screamed out the pattern that I'm telling you about right now. And baby, buckle up, because these are the artists who screamed it publicly, who wrote it on signs, on their bodies, had witnesses, said it with speeches, and wrote it with their own words in songs. And their fate still ended up the same way. And this is where it goes from no longer being a pattern, but to something else entirely. Let's start in 1971, okay? Motown's #1 male recording artist signed to a label who told him what to say, what to write, what to record, when to record it, and how it should sound. But then he had something to say about the war in Vietnam, about police brutality, about the state of the world. And the label told him it was the worst thing they had ever heard, and they refused to release it. He released it anyway, and it did so well that they were forced to renegotiate his contract, making him the highest earning black artist on that label. So he won that round, but the label kept coming. They altered and released his album without his consent, even after he said it was unfinished. So he left Motown. He made a comeback, won his first 2 Grammys, was on his first world tour, and was shot by his own father with a pew-pew he had given his father as a gift. Now, his daddy claimed it was self-defense, but that's neither here nor there. The label, the catalog, made the label over hundreds of millions of dollars. He fought the label his whole life, and the label outlived him and kept collecting checks off his voice and his name. 2002, Harlem. Let's talk about the artist who didn't just fight behind closed doors, but stood at a podium at a civil rights organization's headquarters one night in Harlem and said, with a minister standing next to him, recorded, documented, written down, these are his words: throughout the years, black artists have been taken advantage of completely. People like James Brown, Sammy Davis Jr., the pioneers, the real pioneers who inspired me. These artists were always on tour because if they stopped touring, they would be broke. Then he said, the record companies do conspire against their artists. They steal, they cheat, they do whatever they can, especially against black artists. Then he said something that I think should have stopped the industry in its tracks. He said, we pioneer, we innovate, and at the end of the story, it's not an accident. It happens on purpose. And then he held up a sign of the name of his label, the CEO, with devil horns on his head, a pitchfork, and a tail. And the sign read, Sony Music Kills. That was in 2002, and he was leaving the label. He owned half their publishing, and they were furious about it. 7 years later, he's found in his home dead after a physician administered drugs, and this physician happened to be connected to the company that was orchestrating his comeback tour, the very company financing it. And after his death, the same label that he called out acquired 60% of his publishing estate, giving the label the rights to everything he spent his life protecting. He said it out loud in front of God and everybody, and the story still ended the same. The Brit Awards 1995, there was an artist who stopped using words altogether and instead changed his name legally to an unpronounceable symbol so that the record label could not own his identity. He appeared to an award show with the word slave written on his cheek. In one ceremony, his acceptance speech was 4 words. In concert, perfectly free. On record, slave. He told Rolling Stone that people think I'm a fool for writing slave on my face, but if I can't do what I want to do, what am I? He said, when you stop a man from dreaming, he becomes a slave. He said, I don't own my own music. I don't own my masters. When you don't own your masters, your master owns you. He eventually got his masters back in 2014, and 2 years later, he died without a will, with one of the largest vaults of unreleased music in recorded history of sound. And baby, when he died, the vault opened and the money started flowing to everyone but him. Now, I could go on, but the point is this. That man who died, worth $850 million, had an empire that was built on the backs of artists who never got to see that empire come to fruition, who never got to have the freedom of owning the art that they created. And they knew something was very wrong, and they named it. And where are they now? And who are the ones still collecting a check?
These issues affected artists across many labels and companies, not just those associated with Clive Davis. Some performers praised the opportunities major labels provided. Others argued that the financial arrangements often favored corporations over creators. These music industry debates continue to this very day. No relationship defined Clive Davis's career more publicly than his professional relationship with Whitney Houston. He often described discovering Whitney as one of the greatest moments of his career. He championed her albums and helped oversee her releases. He publicly defended her through difficult periods in her life.
Therefore, there have been moments and times where he just goes, you know what, you're just impossible. And I go, out of all these people and all the walls you have on these people, you have Sly Stone, you got Janis Joplin, you got Art Funk, Simon and Garfunkel. I'm the most impossible one. And he goes, yeah, and I just thought that was the funniest thing. That's funny. After his long career as an executive and someone who knows how to take a singer and a song and put them together, you know what I'm saying, and just knows how to go out there and get that raw talent. I just thought, wow, I'm impossible.
Your career with her has been very well documented. I want to hear about times that you and her may have disagreed. So let's say that Whitney had a particular idea for something and she pushed back on you.
The one time, I think we were doing the second album, I played her a song, written no less by the great Kenny Edmonds, Babyface. Why does it hurt so bad? She says, that's not me. I said, well, let's have fun with this. But she had never said no. I said, well, what is it about why does it hurt so bad that you don't? She said, if a guy betrays me, if a guy is unfaithful to me, if a guy rejects me, A, my religion tells me, have confidence in yourself, this is not the right guy for you. B, I know in my heart this is not the right guy for me. And so I would just move on. I said, this just shows how spoiled you are. Because let me tell you, that song is universal truth. Babyface wrote universal truth. And if you're the average person in a monogamous relationship with somebody, and that person rejects you or betrays you, you're hurt. And you're hurt bad. She said, well, okay, first time we disagreed, we moved on. When she left, I called Babyface up. I said, Kenny, Whitney doesn't feel the song is for me. Normally, you can't ask a writer to put something on hold because that's how they make money. But Whitney's first album had just sold 26 million copies. And he said, of course, I'll leave it for you. So I put the demo with the lyric sheet in the upper right-hand drawer. Fast forward, I think about 5 years, okay? I get a call from Whitney. Let's have lunch. She said, I don't want to talk on the phone. I want to come in and be with you. I said, okay. So she came in with her hamburger and Coca-Cola. And she said, I didn't want to tell you on the phone. I'm leaving Bobby. I'm getting a divorce. I'm not blaming either party for the well-known mutuality of drug use, but I listened and she said it's just one hurt too much and one betrayal too much, so I'm getting divorced. So we chatted about that, obviously. She said, only once in our career together, I didn't feel the song was right for me. Who recorded that song? I said, no one. She said, no one. How could that be? I said, I put it on hold. Really? What was the name of it? I told her the name. Why does it hurt so bad? I took it out of the upper right-hand drawer where I had left it. She said, let's play it. And I played it with her reading the lyric sheet. She said, I'm ready. She said, I'm ready to record it. I understand it now because I hurt real bad.
But as Whitney's personal struggles became increasingly visible, public attention also turned toward the people around her. After her tragic death in 2012, countless rumors spread online. Some questioned the timing of her passing. Others speculated about industry figures.
Before we talk about Clive Davis, there's one question people still ask about this moment. What did Whitney Houston write in the letter she handed Brandy? The contents were never fully revealed, but that question leads to a bigger one. Clive Davis. To some, he was the greatest music executive who ever lived. To others, he's one of the most controversial figures in music history. When Whitney Houston died at the Beverly Hilton in 2012, she was found just hours before Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy party. Many people have never understood why the party continued, and Whitney isn't the only name that comes up. Janis Joplin, Aretha Franklin, TLC. In one of the music industry's most famous confrontations, Left Eye and T-Boz made the trip from Atlanta to New York with a bodyguard by their side. Chili flew in separately and met them outside Arista Records. Together, they confronted Clive Davis over contracts and royalties after selling millions of records. For critics, stories like these aren't separate, they're connected. That's why, after Clive Davis's death, some people are mourning a legend. Others are revisiting old questions. Questions about power, questions about artists, questions they believe still haven't been answered, including one that started with a letter Whitney handed to Brandy.
Fact, it's also been linked to the death of Whitney Houston, and even though this sounds crazy when you first hear it, everything begins to add up once you hear the details. So as we all know, Whitney died on February 11th, 2012, in her bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. But what most people don't know is that it happened the night before Davis's annual pre-Grammy Gala, which he went ahead and hosted anyway, even after Whitney's death.
That party that you throw every year and the tragic day that she died, there were many. Why did you let the party go on?
Of course, this is a personal thing. But the Grammys were the next night. You don't cancel. You turn an evening into a tribute.
You did a magnificent evening.
Into...
Did you give a thought to canceling?
Never.
You never thought?
Never.
Exactly what happened inside the iconic Beverly Hilton remains a mystery. Paramedics raced to the 4th floor and found a lifeless Whitney Houston inside her hotel room bathtub. They tried in vain to resuscitate her with CPR.
You're out in Hollywood, a lot of people come up missing. Feels like it might be a lot of that.
Contrary to the coroner's conclusion that her death was accidental, Hubel claims that Houston's body shows classic defense wounds consistent with someone fighting for her life.
Did Kanye West just expose Clive Davis for killing Whitney Houston? Kanye recently spoke about how Hollywood elites will often stage a celebrity death to make it look like they unalived themselves, and fans are now saying that this is exactly what happened to Whitney. See, just hours after Whitney was discovered in her hotel room bathtub, her longtime mentor Clive Davis held a pre-Grammy party in the same hotel, and he allegedly knew that Whitney's body was still in the building.
I don't know what could motivate a person to have a party in a building where the person whose life he had influenced so enormously.
A number of Whitney's friends and family have called out Clive for disrespecting Whitney. However, fans are now saying this whole situation is much more serious. In fact, a lot of people are convinced Clive is one of those Hollywood elites that Kanye talked about who have the power to make celebs disappear. But does this mean that Clive was somehow involved in Whitney's death? And why are fans saying that Clive's pre-Grammy party was a ritual? Let's get into it.
Whitney Houston's death was ruled an accidental drowning. No public evidence established that Clive Davis was responsible. Even so, because Davis hosted a pre-Grammy event that weekend, his name became part of online discussions and speculation. Supporters argued he had been one of Whitney's strongest professional advocates. Critics questioned whether the industry had done enough. Those larger questions remained part of the conversation surrounding many music stars. As Clive Davis's influence grew, so did public curiosity. Across social media, podcasts, and YouTube, numerous theories have circulated about powerful music executives. These theories have included claims about secret networks, hidden influence, and coordinated control over the entertainment industry. Some online creators have also speculated about Clive Davis personally. It's important to note that these claims have not been substantiated by reliable public evidence. What is documented is that Davis occupied one of the highest positions in the music business for decades, making decisions that affected countless careers. That level of influence naturally attracted both admiration and suspicion. Whether viewed as a visionary executive or as a symbol of the industry's concentration of power, Clive Davis left a lasting mark on American music. He helped launch the careers of legendary icons like Whitney Houston. He famously revived the careers of established stars, bringing them back to the spotlight. He shaped trends, directing the course of popular music for generations. He introduced audiences to artists like Alicia Keys, who would become global icons. For many, he demonstrated that the person behind the scenes could influence popular culture almost as much as the performers on stage. The deeper you look into the history of music, the more you realize that every legendary voice has a story. Behind many of those voices are executives whose decisions changed the course of entertainment history. Some are celebrated with the highest honors the industry can bestow. Some are criticized for the ways they exert their immense influence. Most are a little of both, leaving behind a complex narrative. In our final chapter, we'll examine Clive Davis's later years, the honors he received, the criticism that followed him throughout his career. We will look at his lasting impact on music culture and the complicated legacy he leaves behind.